So if you are renovating a house, right, you don't start by installing these sleek imported marble countertops if the foundation itself is actively sinking.
Right, yeah. Or if the electrical wiring hasn't been updated since, like, 1982.
Exactly. I mean, the cosmetic stuff, it might look incredible on day one, but eventually the whole house is just going to collapse.
It's unavoidable.
It is. And today we are looking at a software platform that realized its own foundation was, well, basically rotting. And we're examining the extreme globe-spanning renovation they undertook to fix it. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Today we are diving into the 2026 release notes and the tutorial roadmaps for two intertwined financial software brands, which are osFinancials and TurboCASH.
And honestly, this transition, it essentially serves as a masterclass in modernizing legacy tech. Like, this isn't just a list of minor bug patches.
Well, not at all.
It is a fundamental teardown of decades of technical debt. They are completely restructuring how everyday users interact with and even learn these really complex financial systems.
Yeah, we are going to explore everything from exterminating this bizarre, decades-old layout bug called the wandering checkbox, which sounds crazy.
It's a great name for a bug, honestly.
It really is. All the way down to the underlying mechanics of how you rebuild a global chart of accounts to natively support 105 different languages without, breaking the database entirely.
Which is a massive undertaking.
Huge. So whether you manage legacy code bases yourself, or maybe you design user tutorials, or honestly, if you just appreciate the sheer engineering willpower it takes to drag an aging platform into the modern era, you are going to find some massive takeaways here.
Absolutely.
Because before we can even look at how people learn to use the software, we have to look at the literal pixels on their screen. You cannot teach modern finance on a fractured interface.
Right, because the interface sets the baseline for user trust. I mean, think about it. If the software looks like it's falling apart visually, the user instantly assumes the math underneath it is broken too.
Yeah, if the buttons are broken, my ledger is probably broken. And the document actually kicks off by addressing exactly that kind of trust-breaking issue, this thing they call the wandering checkbox.
Yes, the infamous wandering checkbox.
It sounds like a mythical creature, but it was a very real, very scattered user interface glitch that they inherited all the way from their legacy TurboCASH H3 days.
Right.
Basically, a user would open a critical settings screen and the checkboxes would just be like floating randomly out of alignment, completely disconnected from their actual text labels.
Yeah, and the root cause here is just a textbook example of legacy technical debt. The wandering checkbox wasn't actually a coding error in the checkbox element itself.
Wait, really? It wasn't the checkbox code.
No, it was the font.
The font caused the UI to break.
Yeah, the software was hard-coded to rely on MS sans serif. And, back in the 1990s, that font was an absolute industry standard. But it was a rasterized bitmap font.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
Meaning it was mapped to specific, rigid pixel coordinates on low-resolution monitors. But when you try to run that same rigid font on a modern operating system, one with dynamic scaling, high DPI displays, shifting window sizes, the interface literally doesn't know how to render it.
Oh, I see.
It just throws the graphical elements wherever it can. Panics, basically.
Or just tosses the checkbox into the void. That's wild. So the 2026 fix they implemented, this is in version 5.1.0.295. It's a transition to a modern Unicode-compliant font.
Yeah.
The developers simply added a parameter, Avant N2, into the software's configuration file. But wait, if this was just a matter of, telling the software to use a modern font, how did a bug like that survive in the code until 2026?
Well, because we tend to view fonts as purely aesthetic, right? Like
Yeah.
choosing Arial instead of Times New Roman for a high school essay.
Yeah, exactly. Just making it look pretty.
Right. But in a legacy database-driven application, a font is structural. It is the core data fidelity mechanism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that font dictates the rendering of every single data grid, every drop-down menu, every transaction ledger in the entire architecture. So swapping out a hard-coded font means you have to rigorously test that the new Unicode characters won't cause historical financial data to suddenly render as total gibberish.
That makes so much sense. It's not just a coat of paint. It's the load-bearing wall of the UI.
Exactly.
And transitioning to Unicode doesn't just fix a wandering checkbox for English users either. The source material details how this single parameter switch cured massive character corruption issues across the globe.
Right, the global impact was huge.
Yeah, grids and drop-down lists that were previously mangled in Greek, Turkish, Thai, Chinese, they suddenly rendered perfectly. It even enabled proper RTL right-to-left development for Arabic.
And that Unicode transition, it acts as the gateway to true global scaling. But rendering the characters visually was actually only half the battle here.
Right, because once they fixed the font, they found another wall.
A much more dangerous systemic failure. Once those characters displayed correctly, the developers immediately slammed into the dynamic SQL error -303.
Okay, yeah. And this wasn't just a visual glitch, right? This was a hard software crash.
A total crash, yes.
It happened because the database fields for these legacy batch types and language names, they were capped at a tiny 16 characters.
Just 16.
Right. So if a user tried to input a name using complex, multi-byte international characters, the entire database would just hit a wall and shut down. They eventually expanded this field limit from 16 to 128 characters, which seems like a no-brainer, but why was it 16 in the first place?
To understand why this was happening, we have to look at how data was stored historically. Back in the 80s and early 90s, memory was incredibly expensive.
Oh, right. Every byte mattered.
Exactly. Developers saved every single kilobyte they could. Capping a description field at 16 characters was just standard efficiency practice. The problem is that modern UTF-8 encoding uses multiple bytes to store non-Latin characters.
Okay, so like a standard English letter might take 1 byte.
Right, but an Arabic or Thai character might take 3 or 4 bytes per character.
Man, it reminds me of the early days of Twitter, when the strict 140-character limit forced everyone to use terrible grammar and acronyms just to get a thought out. A 16-character database limit forces catastrophic abbreviations.
It's actually worse than abbreviations. When you paste a 10-character Arabic word into that field, the database engine expects 10 bytes of data, but instead it gets 30 bytes.
Always.
So the engine's memory buffer literally overflows. It doesn't know where to put the excess data, so it panics and triggers the SQL -303 crash to prevent corrupting the rest of the hard drive.
Wow. It just pulls the ripcord.
It has to. So expanding that limit to 128 characters required rewriting the underlying schema of the database to finally accommodate the modern reality of international data.
That is fascinating, and this directly connects to the next massive phase of the 2026 overhaul. Because once you fix the Arabic text rendering and, you stop the database from crashing when Thai characters are entered, suddenly your software actually works for a massively expanded global audience.
Yes, the doors are wide open.
You are no longer just dealing with local users. You're faced with the incredibly complex puzzle of managing 105 different languages across 2 distinct software brands, osFinancials and TurboCASH.
And managing a single language file in a complex application is already tedious. Managing 105 localized translations is an administrative nightmare that can completely paralyze the development team if the architecture isn't perfect.
Oh, I can only imagine. But the sources highlight a highly elegant solution for that exact nightmare. It involves utilizing a dynamic placeholder, specifically written in the code as bracket at appname at bracket.
Right, the appnme tag.
Yeah. Previously, the specific brand name TurboCASH H53 was hard-coded into 4,071 individual translation files across those 105 languages.
Which means every time they released a minor version update, or they wanted to compile a custom branded version for a specific region, they faced thousands of potential points of failure.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here. Couldn't a developer just run a simple automated find and replace script to update the brand name across all those files in, like, a few seconds?
You'd think so. But a global find-replace is a highly fragile development strategy. The core concept the development team is embracing here is single-source maintenance.
Single-source maintenance.
Right. If you rely on running scripts across thousands of external files, the moment an outdated, unupdated translation file gets accidentally uploaded by a community contributor, it breaks the continuity.
Oh, because it misses the script update.
Exactly. You suddenly have a Bulgarian version of osFinancials proudly calling itself TurboCASH H53 in the middle of a critical setup menu. It completely shatters the professionalism of the software.
It's like having a master key for a massive hotel. Instead of sending a maintenance crew running around to physically change the lock mechanisms on 4,071 individual doors every time management changes, you just update the master key's digital frequency.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah. By reinstating this placeholder, the software dynamically pulls the application name from one single configuration file at runtime. They future-proof the entire 105 language ecosystem with one line of code.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And beyond the back-end mechanics, it is really fascinating to look at the meticulous attention to detail they applied to the user-facing text strings in these language files.
Yeah, they really cleaned house.
They actively worked to lower the cognitive load for the user.
They did. The release notes show them replacing these clunky, ambiguous legacy text pathways. They took formats like setup dow arrow internet with a really crude text arrow and replaced it with a much cleaner format wrapped in single quotes, utilizing a proper Unicode directional arrow.
Which looks so much better.
Way better.
Mm.
They also started wrapping interactive buttons in square brackets within the text, like bracket next bracket and bracket cancel bracket.
Yeah, and the psychology of user interface design actually calls that affordance.
Affordance.
Yeah. When a user reads the word next in a sentence, it's just a word. But when they see it wrapped in brackets, the brain instantly processes it as a bounded, pressable button.
Oh, that makes total sense.
The user doesn't have to spend mental energy guessing what is a set of instructions and what is an executable command.
So the foundation is reinforced, the interface bugs are gone, the database can handle multi-byte global characters, and the single source maintenance is flawlessly executing across 105 languages.
The software is technically sound.
Exactly. But this leads directly into the development team's next major hurdle, because they suddenly realize that having a pristine, bug-free interface used by non-technical people all over the world means absolutely nothing if the instruction manual still reads like an MIT textbook.
Oh, and this is historically the hardest pivot for software engineers to make. Oh, yeah. Developers naturally want to explain the architecture they built. They're proud of it. But if the user journey is fundamentally confusing, the adoption rate will crash, regardless of how powerful the underlying code actually is.
Right. And the document reveals a massive paradigm shift in their accounting AME tutorials. The Legacy 2024 manual was built on what they openly called technical instruction. It was grouped arbitrarily into these developer-centric categories like Module A, Module B, and Module C.
Which means nothing to a normal person.
Nothing. The 2026 modernization entirely abandons that structure in favor of what they call outcome-based learning.
Yes.
The table of contents no longer reflects the software's internal hierarchy. Instead, it mirrors the chronological life cycle of actually running a business.
Right. So phase 1 is foundations. Phase 4 is master data. Phase 7 is automation, which introduces high-value tools like their bank import plugin. Phase 9 tackles insights, covering pivot tables and open item processing.
It's so much more logical, and I am fascinated by the specific vocabulary shifts they hunted down to support this new philosophy. They took a highly confusing internal engineering phrase like sets of books available in the bin folder.
Horrible phrase.
Right, and they rewrote it simply as template engineering.
Because sets of books in the bin folder forces the user to conceptualize the hidden local directory structure of their hard drive. A baker in Istanbul trying to run payroll does not care about the C drive bin directory.
No, they just want to pay their employees.
Exactly. Template engineering abstracts the technical location and focuses purely on the action the user is trying to take.
The text uses a brilliant metaphor here, actually. It explains that trying to teach a local sole proprietor using full IFRS standards, the international financial reporting standards used by massive multinational corporations, is like trying to teach a teenager to drive a car by handing them the maintenance manual for a Boeing 747.
That is exactly what it feels like.
Right. It is technically comprehensive, sure, but practically it just induces immediate paralysis.
And by restructuring the tutorial into business phases, they shifted the educational model from just-in-case complexity to just-in-time knowledge.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, if you are starting a small service business, you do not need the just-in-case knowledge of how a global corporation calculates complex lease liabilities. You don't need it.
Right.
You need the just-in-time knowledge of how to issue your very first invoice right now.
Right now, exactly. And mapping automation to phase 7 completely changes how users perceive the software, too. In a technical manual, something like a bank import plugin is usually buried in, like Appendix G, as an optional high-level feature.
Yeah, for power users only.
But by positioning it natively in the workflow as phase 7, it tells the user automation is a natural, expected phase of your business growth. You stop fighting the software and you start letting it do the heavy lifting.
And to continue that driving analogy, teaching someone to drive doesn't just require a logical manual. It requires an intuitive dashboard where the instruments actually make sense.
Yes.
And in accounting software, that dashboard is the chart of accounts. And the 2026 update completely rebuilt that dashboard from scratch.
It really did. The sources outline a massive migration away from the chaotic alphanumeric account codes popularized in the 1980s. Back then, a user might have to memorize that an account for office furniture was labeled something cryptic like G60000010.
Just alphabet soup.
Exactly. The update ditches that entirely for a modern, logical, four-digit numeric block system. So the 1000s are universally reserved for assets. The 2000s are for liabilities. The 3000s represent equity, moving all the way up to the 5000s for standard expenses.
And moving to that four-digit block system provides immediate cognitive recognition. The user doesn't have to look up what an account is in some index. The moment they see a number starting with a 5, they implicitly know they're looking at an expense.
It's so clean, and they applied what they call the AME hybrid strategy to aggressively modernize the terminology for small business owners, like, say, a local handyman. They scrubbed out archaic accounting terms that just cause unnecessary anxiety.
Which is such a smart move.
Yeah, like the vague term sundry was replaced with uncategorized. The highly concerning word suspense was changed to take on or balancing account, and capital was relabeled to the much clearer owner's contribution.
The psychology there is vital. I mean, to a non-accountant, seeing money sitting in a suspense account implies a terrifying error has occurred.
It sounds like a thriller movie.
Right, like the funds are trapped in limbo and the FBI is coming.
Exactly.
But take on sounds like a standard administrative task. It actively lowers the anxiety of doing the books.
But I do have a question about how the architecture handles regional tax differences in a standardized system like this. The document highlights a concept called the tax switch, using Account 2200 as a universal template.
Right.
So if Account 2200 is VAT in the UK, but sales tax in the US, those calculate completely differently under the hood. Does the system just change the name and hope the math works?
No, the brilliance of the tax switch is the strict decoupling of the ledger identity from the calculation logic. Account 2200 is essentially just a structural bucket.
Okay, a bucket.
The complex tax rules engine the code that actually dictates whether a transaction should be multiplied by 15% for South Africa or 8% for a local U.S. municipality. That code sits entirely separate from the chart of accounts.
Oh, I get it. So the user just sees their familiar localized label on the bucket.
Exactly. While the software applies the correct regional math dynamically in the background, it's totally hidden from the user.
That's incredibly elegant. And they also built in scalability with this parent-child rule. So if our hypothetical handyman starts growing the business and needs more granularity regarding vehicle expenses, the core parent account remains 5300 for motor vehicles.
Yep.
But they can easily spawn child accounts like 5300-010 specifically for fuel and 5300-020 for repairs. It expands without breaking the foundation.
Right, the system scales with the complexity of the business. The handyman doesn't have to migrate to a completely new accounting methodology just because they bought a second delivery van.
I have to ask, though, and maybe I'm playing devil's advocate again here, by stripping away all those complex IFRS standards and giving a small business owner just a streamlined Core 15 list of accounts to look at, aren't we dumbing down the accounting a bit too much?
It's a fair question.
Right. Like if they ever get audited by the government, isn't that extreme simplicity going to backfire?
It's a tension every single financial software architect faces. Approachability versus strict legal compliance. But what the developers achieved here isn't dumbing it down. It is compliance by stealth.
Compliance by stealth. How does the software pull that off?
Well, it goes back to that four-digit block structure we talked about. International financial reporting standards mandate that a balance sheet must strictly segregate non-current assets from current assets.
Right, which sounds very complicated.
It does. But by structurally programming all the 1000s as non-current assets and the 2000s as current assets, the user doesn't need to know the technical definition of liquidity.
Oh, wow.
By simply categorizing their fuel receipt in the 5000s and the purchase of a new power drill in the thousands, the user is natively building an entirely compliant, audit-ready balance sheet behind the scenes.
That's incredible.
The numbered structure does the sorting for them, completely eliminating the need for a CPA to manually translate their data at the end of the year.
So the structural constraints of the software inherently guide the user toward professional compliance without them even realizing it. That is phenomenal design.
It really is. It allows the user to focus all their mental energy on actually running their business, rather than forcing them to become a makeshift accountant.
Looking back at the incredible journey of this 2026 software update, I mean, the through line is undeniable. It started at the deepest structural level, eradicating the wandering checkbox and fundamentally restructuring the database schema to handle 128-character multi-byte inputs.
Which was huge.
Right. And then that structural stability unlocked global localization, solved brilliantly by that dynamic bracket at APP NAME at bracket placeholder.
A single source maintenance.
Exactly. And once the global audience could access the tool seamlessly, it forced the most important change of all. Rewriting the tutorials from technical developer jargon into the natural life cycle of a business, and deploying a chart of accounts that enforces compliance by stealth.
True sophistication always looks like simplicity to the end user. You hide the complex machinery, so the user only has to interact with a clean dashboard.
And that is the ultimate takeaway for you if you're listening right now. Whether you are coding an app or writing a training manual for new hires or just setting up a basic workflow for your own team, your goal should be identical. Removing friction, whether that friction is a bad 1990s font, a confusing directory structure, or an archaic accounting term that induces panic, is the absolute pinnacle of good design.
Yeah, and we saw how something as simple as changing the name of an account from suspense to take on fundamentally alters a user's emotional response to a task. So I encourage you to look closely at your own industry and your daily communications. What Boeing 747 manuals or archaic sundry terms are you unknowingly forcing your clients or colleagues to navigate every day?
That's a great question.
And how could you rebuild them for 2026?
A brilliant thought to leave off on. If you take the time to truly repair the foundation, the renovation can be spectacular. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of modern software. Keep questioning the systems you use every day, keep unpacking the complexities around you, and we will catch you next time.